Good morning. I'm Michelle Boorstein. I'm one of the religion reporters at the Washington Post. And with me on stage are, closest to me, Congressman Andrew Harris from Maryland, Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez of California, former ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, and Chris Matthews, host of Hardball on MSNBC. So we're going to have a little conversation today. Let me open it up with a general question to all of you. From writing about Pope Francis, I've heard all kinds of things, ways that he's been described. Some people call him a raging liberal or a socialist or a wily politician. Do you think that we understand him or that we know him? Maybe we could just go in order.
I think that his papacy is still relatively new. I think we're just getting to know what Pope Francis is all about, and I think that'll work its way out in the next few years.
I think the exciting thing is that people want to know him. He is drawing people to the church. He is drawing people to hear what he is saying. And even those who are not Catholic or don't intend to be Catholic are hearing his message. And so, as my colleague here said, it is new. He is new, but I think he's going to have that lasting ability with respect to changing our world.
Yeah, I think the way you wrote it, Michelle, in your article last week, that he has exemplified a sort of studied ambiguity in his ability to present both sides of difficult questions and create, in some ways, more uncertainty than before he spoke up about them.
About as well as we know Argentina.
Do you think we can predict, what's going to happen after this week, once we get to know him a little better and he becomes much more specific and people?
I believe he's pretty unpredictable, actually. That's one of the exciting things about him. But what's exciting also is the fact that he, out of any of the popes that I've really known and understood in my adult life, he is open to hearing people. He is open to, a lot of people say, oh, he's left and he's liberal. And I don't think he's any of those things. I just believe that he's opening up and allowing us to have a dialogue that is so important, especially within the Catholic religion.
So,
I think people who have been trained as I have, I went to a Jesuit high school, understand what the Jesuit tradition is. And it's as the ambassador says, it actually looks at all sides of the argument, makes you think about what the answer is. So this will take a while. This will take a lot of listening to what the Pope has to say and a lot of introspection on the parts of the listeners to come up with what the answer is.
So.
Well, I think one of the things that's become evident is he's strongly formed and dominated by his Latin American and Argentinian experience. And that's rooted in his view of corporations, free enterprise, capitalism, and the preferential option for the poor, which is indisputable. And so I have great hopes that he will see a different place when he comes to the United States. And he even has shown that he's interested in learning when he responded last summer to a reporter who said, "You don't know about the middle class in America." And he said, "I'm going to study up on that." So I hope he comes away with.
If there's any left.
Yeah, I hope he comes. Well, that's a separate issue that we can talk about. But I hope he comes away with an understanding that the experience in religious and personal freedom in America has been different than his.
I think all countries, even East Germans didn't understand West Germany until they got together. They thought it was a sharp-elbowed society. It turns out Germany's quite socialistic. It had all kinds of social safety nets they didn't know about. They just thought of it as rampant capitalism. I think he looks upon us that way a bit. I think we're not the cartoon. I think we have a lot of social safety nets in this country. We're not that. We're not a pure capitalist society. We're just not. And I think he looks at us that way, perhaps. And also, it's the Goliath of the North thing. The way they all look at us down there.
But he really does bring so many good pieces of the Latin American experience or the Hispanic experience. We're very dedicated to our families. We're very dedicated to community. We're multi-generational. And so I believe that as he opens up these issues, many of them very difficult and which have excluded, in a sense, so many who have been in the faith or have wanted to be in the faith, he's not doing it just, with one generation in mind. He's looking at the entirety as a family. And so you're right, his Latin American experience does show through in his demeanor and his way of looking at things. But I agree with Chris. America is a great place, and there is room for capitalism, as long as we use it correctly, and as long as we do have the safety net, and I do believe that we have quite a bit. It's eroded over the time I've seen it.
That we'll get to know him, but you're essentially saying
he'll get to know
us. So maybe he has stereotypes
look
about us as well.
Exactly.
Right.
Actually, I was speaking to the ambassador about what's it like when you're representing the United States in the Vatican. A lot of times you hear like, oh, they have sort of an anti-American bent. That's a little bit different than speaking about the Pope in particular. But since we're talking about perceptions of the United States, do you think that's a common sentiment, a skepticism about, and how does it infuse what kind of work is done there?
Well, I think Chris alluded to that big brother up north thing that also happens with Europe to the United States, as we've seen both in the secular aspects of life as well as with the Holy See.
How many prime ministers has Italy had since World War II?
Yeah.
67 or something?
But there is a minority in the Curia that have more of a Eurocentric view of the United States than we might like. And it came out at different times where we've had policy disagreements with the Holy See, like the non-proliferation work with India that Bush did in 2007 brought some of that out. But it's a minority. By and large, most of the leaders of the church are deeply thankful for the religiosity that in the United States that the First Amendment has bred, and of the tremendous support financially that the United States gives to the Catholic Church.
So speaking about, we always talk about how popular this Pope is, and we can forget that Pope John Paul also had not exactly the same type of popularity, but huge popularity. So, but this is a modern type of popularity that involves being retweeted thousands of times and having some, famous names like Raul Castro say he might consider coming back to the church. It's a different era. Do you think that this could bring people back to the church, or we just like to retweet him because we think he, says these quips that people love? Could he actually bring people back to the church in a meaningful way? What do you think?
I think like John Paul II, and I just had read that actually John Paul II's popularity was even higher. I mean, it's hard for us to believe it was even higher overall. But we did see a resurgence, especially with youth, when John Paul II was the Pope. I mean, the pontiff who goes around talking about issues that are important in today's society generates enthusiasm among those seeking guidance. And I think that's what this Pope brings. This Pope brings the offering of being able to provide guidance for what the future of the world should be for every human being. Again, as the Cardinal said, speaking about individual human dignity, this is a message that's universal.
I've had the opportunity to know the last three popes in particular, and they each brought something to the table. It's what a leader does. But what's exciting about Francis, and what's exciting is that he is talking to the issues of people who really have not had the faith-based life, young people. Young people are so focused on our planet and on this whole climate change issue. And more than you would imagine. I'm always amazed about it. And he actually is convening and talking and reaching out to them with respect to that. I told you this was very generational, multi-generational. He's also looking at those who have left the church or have been excluded out of the church and said, I don't think we're going to change the church's position on abortion, for example, but he has brought this message, a message that's very important to me. This whole message of having mercy and compassion and bringing people back into the fold. And I think he will not only increase the Catholic faith, but also make others understand that whatever faith they have, that it's important to have faith and spiritualness in your life.
Chris, what do you think? Do you think that people will change their belonging?
I know they will, because, I'm in the media. I have a lot of Jewish friends in the world I work in. Fact, every day, they like this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Fact.
Conversion.
These are facts. I hear it every day, because it's the old Christian versus Jewish thing that's gone on for 2,000 years, and I think he's done a lot to get rid of it. And I think people feel like they're included now. And the other thing, women have had abortions. I can tell you that common sense will tell you that people want to be, even if they have a murky moral sense about what they had to do, what they chose to do, and their right to do it. Of course, I completely believe in their right to do it as an American. But the decision they made is always going to be somewhat murky, I think, in some cases. And to have somebody say, just go to confession and put it behind you, move on. Move on. You have a life to lead, and you have family responsibilities and love relationships. Move on. I think that's really powerful. I mean, it's really a wonderful thing. Gay people that have been very religious, they love the ritual of the church, they love the church, and yet they've always felt like they were outcasts. This is dynamite stuff to have a guy say, who am I to judge? This is dynamite. People want to change. There's not going to be a change in abortion. I don't want to talk here about my religious beliefs, whether there should be or not. But this isn't the right place to talk about what the church's doctrine should be, because that's the church's decision. I was a little upset the other day to read an op-ed piece in the Post or the New York Times the other day about the church's belief about abortion. Keep out of it. Stay in your lane, okay? Stay in your lane. The church has a right to decide what's right and wrong.
That's right.
They have the magister. They have the right to teach. Of course, like most liberal Catholics, I have to decide between render unto Caesar what is Caesar and what the gods are gods. I believe in the rights of Americans to make decisions. And we can have all kinds of discussions about the morality of abortion or the immorality of it, but that's not here. Not here. That's in the church, for me.
What were you going to say?
I think Chris said it perfectly. You could make an argument that those very people who have committed some of those grievous sins in the eyes of the church need the church the most for the mercy and compassion to make their life come back into focus a little bit, if that's the business of a church. And the other thing I would say is the respect of the Pope for taking the rough edges off of some of his recent positions of the church can only increase the Holy See's respect in the world and make it a more useful diplomatic partner with the United States to spread a diplomacy based on human dignity.
So if I'm hearing you, obviously you're all saying you think he will have an impact. What about the many, many Catholics who just disagree? They don't see abortion as a sin. They like his language, but if you look at polling, there's a lot of disagreements with the actual church teaching. And not just for Catholicism, that's been a struggle for a lot of Americans with traditional religion in general these days. So, I mean, do you think people would be open to, that he can attract people who may say, look, I just don't agree. I appreciate the softer tone, but I don't agree.
I think Chris said it best. The fact is that the church has always been a church of mercy and forgiveness. That's the bottom line. And doctrine is not going to change. The ability for people to understand that it is a church of forgiveness and mercy is what the message of this Pope is. And that's a very uplifting message. I think Chris hit it on the head with that. It separates doctrine from forgiveness, and this is important. I think people will realize that, and they'll see that there's wisdom in that separation. That the anchoring of Catholic doctrine is not what this Pope is talking about. What he's talking about is when you disagree with the church and you do something that fundamentally disagrees, will you be forgiven? And the answer is clearly, in every circumstance he's talking about, the answer is yes.
I'm not an expert on my Catholic faith, and most Catholics are not experts. We really leave that to the teachings, to the scholars, to those to continue to take a look at it. The fact that this Pope is one of them and is willing to open up and have a discussion, I think in the long term, I don't see major changes in the doctrine, but I do see an opening up of the doctrine that is more in line with what sinners live with every day. I mean, we make mistakes all the time. And we need some place. I truly believe we need a place to go. As you were saying that, Chris said, those women who have had abortions are really conflicted. That's not an easy thing to do, and that's a time most when they need a refuge, a place to go to, a place to understand them, and so it's great to see that Francis has taken the name of Saint Francis. He's taken the name of someone who said, the church is not going to be up here and the people down here, and you're going to do everything that we tell you. Instead, what he is saying is the church is going to be out amongst all of you. And we are going to talk, and we are going to bring you in, and you are going to be the church. The church is the people, after all. It is not the organized religion, it is the people, and that's what he's bringing.
When you talk about this idea of opening up, do you hear among pro-choice Catholics like yourself some kind of hope that he is going to make a change? Do you think that's a common refrain? And what do you say? Do you say that's not realistic, or that's not?
Look, again, I'm not an expert on that, and that's going to be left to those there. I don't believe for a minute that most pro-choice Catholics believe that overnight we're going to change the whole issue with respect to abortion. But what I do hear, many people who are pro-choice and have been fighting for the LGBTQ agenda, many divorced Catholics, that there are so many here in America. What I do hear from them is that instead of focusing on all the negative pieces of what people have done, this is a pope who said, you know, we're not changing that per se, but we're going to focus on what makes me a Catholic, and that is do unto others. You know, work with the poor, bring people in. That there's so much work to be done in this arena. I think it's exciting to see the head of the church say, you know what, let's stop on all this divisive stuff that's been going on, and let's look at what we have in common and what we really need to work on in the world. And that's what I think pro-choice and more liberal Catholics and many American Catholics, as you know, because if you look at the surveys, you're going to see that a lot of people call them menu Catholics or whatever, but that what keeps people as Catholics, a lot of them in America, is this whole idea of community, and that we're in this together, and that we want to work forward on that. And this is what I believe Francis has decided to do.
You know, I go along with that a little bit, but not really. First of all,
you and I disagree all the time.
The thing is, you live complicated lives. We all do. We all live in compartments. One is religion, and it influences the way you behave. Your political decisions about the kind of country you want to live in is it different. This country is about freedom to make up your mind. It's not about state control. This isn't Spain, or certainly wasn't what Spain was, thank God. And so I have, like most Catholics here, Elizabeth Bagley, we are very religious about our religion, and we believe in the right of the church to teach us what's right and wrong. But we also live in a country that is basically built on a constitution of individual freedom. And we just have to reconcile those two every day of our lives. We just have to reconcile them. Nancy Pelosi has to do it. She wouldn't answer questions about her religion here if you asked her. She said so. I'm not going to answer questions. There should be no religious test for a politician in this country. You should never have to say what you believe about your religion to anybody, ever. But you also have to make judgments about whether you abide by the Constitution as you understand it, as the courts understand it. We live this way. But I think it's not, there are things that this Pope can do that hasn't been brought up. That he could do with a stroke of the pen, as we say here, women priests. Do it. He could do that. We need more priests. Is there a big difference between men and women when it comes to being Catholic? There's no difference. This idea of gender difference, I'm not so sure there is a gender difference. So why can't a woman be an anchor man, an anchor woman? I mean, I don't get it. My wife was one. I don't get this big distinction we have about the priesthood being only male. Think about it. Why? Tradition? That can be changed. Tradition's built on tradition. You change it. You can have married priests. I remember after the priest, that thing that happened where we were all, every Catholic, male maybe especially, but everybody was so disgusted by the thing with the altar boys. We had the priest and his family from All Saints come across the Chevy Chase Circle and just sit in the first pew. Everybody felt like cheering. A regular family, at the head of our parish. You know what I mean? People liked it.
You mean it was one of the priests who was married? Is that what you
mean? They were Episcopalians, very high church. I mean, this is very high church across.
One of the anomalies is if you're a married priest in the Episcopalian church and you become a Catholic, you can keep your wife.
But even he was still head of All Saints, which is so Catholic. You think, I went in there one time for a book discussion. I thought I was at home. It is so Catholic, the high church, Anyway, but I think it's that's all tradition and discipline. That's not doctrine.
I would agree with you.
No, you don't have to agree or not to agree.
No,
it's a fact.
Chris,
it is a fact.
Chris,
the Pope can do this anytime he wants to. Go ahead.
Right. But Chris, the difference is this. I mean, you were talking about freedom and the Constitution. Those two have to be separate. I mean, in my mind as a politician, they are separate.
Sure.
I have my upbringing, my Catholic upbringing, my family upbringing, my moral upbringing, and that is me. But when I go and I walk into that chamber to cast votes, it is not, those are based on the Constitution, and those are based on the right of self-determination, the freedoms that exist as we Americans. And so I might have a take on what abortion is about from my religious background, or what other issues are. But when I walk into that chamber, I really disengage from them. I say, you know, this country is about freedoms. It's about self-determination. It's about civil rights. It's about, that's what it's based on. And that's where I vote.
This actually goes back to why we are the exceptional nation. It goes back to the debates between Patrick Henry and James Madison and Jefferson on the other side, the Virginia Declaration of Religious Freedom, where they were not going to tell you what to believe with your religion. And it was enshrined there, and it became enshrined in the First Amendment. And I know Pope Benedict understood it because I spoke with him quite a bit about it. And I hope Pope Francis gets it too, that we are the unique country that has allowed religion to flourish, all religions to flourish, unfettered by statism.
You know, what's interesting is that we have these huge discussions in the political realm of whether your faith should inform your decision as a legislator. What's interesting is that we're all looking forward 3 days from now to hearing a religious leader come and speak in front of a legislative body with the hope that he will inform us
it's amazing.
About which way to go in the context of these huge discussions about legislators shouldn't be informed by their faith.
Well, I wanted to actually ask you about that. We had a story yesterday based on a Washington Post poll that showed, I think it was about 29, 30, 31%, both of Catholics and Americans overall said they were uncomfortable with the Pope speaking to Congress, which is not significant. I mean, that's the minority, but it still raises the discussion. I mean, and it's, as you said, it's never happened before. Do you feel anything complicated about him coming there? I mean, why hasn't it happened? Is it a great thing?
I tend to look at things more from a diplomatic and political point of view, and in that I see it's fantastic that he's here to speak about some of these fundamental principles that he's put forth that really shape his personal diplomacy and reflect the Holy See's ability to do good in the world and advance a diplomacy and an engagement with foreign states based upon the human dignity of the person and the natural rights of man, which line up with our country. So I'm really excited to hear what he has to say.
I view him as the head of a state, and we've had plenty of people come and speak to us as the heads of states in the Congress. So I don't necessarily view him as the Pope coming to talk to the Congress to try to change our minds in some way. I view him from a more diplomatic standpoint. What has he been doing out there? What does he think about Africa? What does he think about South America? How can we work together on the issues that are constantly in front of the Congress, like climate change or the disparity between the haves and the have-nots? I'm looking at him in much the same way as you are, Ambassador, and that is that he is in his efforts of working around the world as the head of a state.
I think he's here as head of state, by the way. Not as the head of a religion.
Well,
really, when you think the Holy See...
That's the technicality, but he is here as head of state.
As I read in my book, the United States and the Holy See are the only two sovereign entities that began based upon the natural rights of man and have found that their entire organizing principle, both internally and externally, has been focused on the protection of the natural rights of man. Every other country, Latin America, Europe, Asia, et cetera, are autocratic in principle.
Well, when you talked about him coming as the head of state, if you remember in 2008 when Pope Benedict came, he didn't attend the state dinner that was in his honor. As I understand, he was trying to keep separate. He's both the Pope and he's head of his state, so it's quite different. I mean, it's sort of, now it seems we're just excited about it, but it's a
I guess
pretty big shift.
After Bibi Netanyahu, anything goes.
I think the ambassador brings up an interesting point. I personally think he is coming as a religious leader, someone who, as the ambassador points out, is going to espouse a set of principles that in many cases are uniquely identified with America. You know, the equality of people, the social justice issues he's talking about, the dignity of each human person, which is really individualism, what we think of as American individualism. That's the dignity of every human person. I think that's the attraction. I think that's why, I think that's why Speaker Boehner invited him. It's because he has a message that actually is congruent in many aspects with what America is about and perhaps where we should be looking. And that's what's so exciting. I think he's going to give a vision to where, honestly, America as a world leader should take the world given his set of principles, which are, again, highly congruent with American principles.
I would somewhat agree with you, but I would also say that I am not. I feel uncomfortable when you say that the United States is the only one that that this is our core value of principles of social justice and of equality and everything. Every people in every country is struggling with this, and so I don't think we're unique in that standpoint. We're unique in the way that we have organized ourselves with a Congress that supposedly represents the people, right? And so in that standpoint, we're different. But every country and every people is struggling with the issues of social justice, with the issues of how you govern yourself, with the issues of the haves and the have-nots, of inequality, with the issues of gender bias going on. So I would say that the fact that he is the leader outside of the Vatican walls for so many people around the world also is important to hear his message.
Yeah, the big difference is certainly political freedom. That we're, in many countries of the world, if you say a word against the leader of the country, you're in jail, you're dead. The way half this country makes fun of Obama every day of the week, saying he's from Borneo or somewhere. And I mean, the comments that are made on television every day about this guy, you try that in some other countries.
Well, that gets back
in
to our
Africa,
fundamental freedoms.
you go to jail.
Since
You
we only
can't
have a
make
few more
fun of
minutes,
the
I want to make
of
sure
the
I ask
president.
you guys, do you expect any headlines out of his meeting with the president? Do you think we're going to learn what's said in there? Anything surprising? Any inside scoop?
I personally hope not. I hope there are no major headlines. I think that should be a more private meeting. As the Cardinal kind of suggests, that the changes that we're going to see are not going to be immediate. They're going to come out over time. They're going to slowly percolate through. So I would hope there are no headlines.
It could be specific issues that they want to work on together. I mean,
Cuba and immigration, probably.
Yeah.
And the climate change. I mean, he just had Governor Jerry Brown and others out to the Vatican to do this whole climate change issue.
Sentencing's a big one. I think the president went out to El Reno, Oklahoma, to the federal penitentiary, and now the Pope went to a penitentiary in Paraguay, and he's evidently going to go in Philadelphia.
And I would personally, as a Latina, I would hope sincerely that they have somewhat of a discussion about the Spanish-speaking countries south of us, because they're so important to the United States and have received so little attention for decades now. And I'm hopeful that in his last couple of years, last year now, that President Obama might be able to, maybe it starts with Cuba, but might be able to jumpstart a discussion and a relationship with those Latin American countries.
I think Cardinal McCarrick said it quite well when the Pope was elected. He said, I hope we have a new evangelization in Latin America, both religiously and geopolitically. And
one of the great things I think he may be doing already, when Franco saw the end of his days coming in Spain, he sort of used the monarchy to pivot off of. He knew that Juan Carlos, the grandson, was willing to play the role of head of state and move the country from fascism, if you want to call it that, colonism or some term they had the unique to Spain, from dictatorship to democracy and to a socialist government in that case.
Yeah,
and they had to pivot off of some structure that was going to be permanent. And for a while I was hoping it was going to be the church in Cuba, that the Castro brothers would gradually abdicate their authority, their dictatorship, gradually dictate it, turn it over to the church that would then sort of be the transitional, the catalyst for change. And I'm still hoping the Pope going through that right now, something like that may be happening. I mean, those guys have got to get off their horse. They have got to give up what they got, that dictatorship. They have got to bring freedom to that.
It's definitely the history is already written on the wall for that.
They got to get rid of the communist stuff.
I agree with Chris, and that's a very profound point. And we saw that play out in Eastern Europe with Cardinal Casaroli.
Yeah.
Save what can be saved, play for the long ball. And I think we see that with Cardinal Ortega in Cuba right now. And I hope you're right.
All right, you've got 1 minute left. Tell me briefly, if you can, has the Pope influenced anything that you do or believe? And we talk so much about the obvious energy he's bringing, and what we're always trying to figure out as reporters is, what's the effect? Are people rethinking their positions on something? Are they doing something different? Is there anything that you can think of that he's moved you in some particular way?
I think he's informed me and the Vatican about the religious persecution issue in the Middle East.
He has reinforced what I believe is a calling in life, and that is the social justice, the reparation of the haves and the have-nots, the helping, if you will, of those most in need. So I think he hasn't changed my mind, but he's made it easier for me to say, yes, this is what for me is my calling.
Yeah, I think as a congressman said, Pope John Paul inspired a great amount of warmth and interest in the part of the United States. And I think this Pope's brought that back too and made the church come alive in the teachings of the church, both principles and diplomatically in the world, come alive for Americans now. And I think that's a great thing.
I think 4 categories. Jewish people feel so much better about the Christian relationship because of this guy. It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Secondly, gay people feel much less excluded, and I don't think they feel excluded at all right now, in fact. Number 3, the women who've had abortions, I said it's murky for a lot of people. Everybody has to make their own judgments about it, so everybody is making their own judgments about it. And he, I think, makes it a lot cleaner and pure for us all to get together on these things. I think he's done a great job. And women who married the wrong guy, they got stuck with the wrong guy. He may be a beater or a drunk, he may be gay, I don't know what the hell the problem was. But they got second marriages off of that. I think annulment should be made easily done. I don't mean to make fun of anybody who's gay or anything, but I think these marriages have been disasters. There's so many women I know, they get married. The second they get married, the guy starts beating them up. There's no reason why that woman should get remarried. And I think that there's extreme cases, but the remarried Catholics should feel that they're part of the church again. I think he's done some great things. These are all tricky, sensitive points to even talk about, but they're lives. And I think he's bringing those lives together again. And I think it's great that he's done it. And if that's all he does, great. I hope he lives long, by the way. The last time we had a good one, he didn't live long. And I want him to live.
Month, 90 days.
Test the food.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Michelle.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. That's good.
We do have a couple of questions from the audience. If we could just indulge you for like 2 minutes. I'll let Sarah take it.
We just have 3 questions. If you could predict one thing Pope Francis will say in front of Congress, what would it be for all of you?
I think he's going to talk about religious persecution in the Middle East and the migrant situation.
I believe he will talk about the flight, especially of the Syrians and others, and the need for us as a country to take more responsibility, not in what has happened, but in a solution to the problem.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that he's going to talk about immigration, particularly since his first papal trip was focused on immigration. And it's such a huge issue right now for the United States and most of the world. And I'd be surprised if he doesn't mention the environmental concern that he has and the relationship to the encyclical.
I think the environment's a life issue, and if life is important and valuable, we better protect the planet. It's where we live.
America is typically seen as a Protestant majority nation. How is Pope Francis influencing and promoting ecumenical or Catholic Protestant unity?
I think you answered that one, Chris.
We Catholics have always felt like a minority in this country.
Yeah.
And we've sort of enjoyed being tough about it, too. We've sort of liked that edge.
But I think in terms of him making the church come alive for all Americans, I think he's doing that. I think he's showing Jews and Muslims and Protestants and people of all faith traditions that there's a vibrant Catholic church out there that, while you may disagree with some doctrines, you can't disagree with this more welcoming and embracing attitude that he's bringing to the fore.
And I believe that the fact that he has been more accepting and worked more across religions is showing us all, especially me as a lawmaker, the ability to bring into the fold all faiths. I mean, it's enabled me to work better with the LDS Church, with the Buddhists in my district. I have the Bible Belt of California, and I have everything there. And so I think he's shown us a way in which we can do that and amplified it.
I mean, I think he's going to extend the ecumenism with the other Christians that Pope Benedict started. I attend a former Anglican church that's now Catholic. I think that this Pope may accelerate the ability to reunify parts of the Christian churches.
This upcoming year will be Pope Francis's Jubilee Year of Mercy. How can the U.S. government become more merciful?
The U.S. government become more merciful?
Look, I think we're going to
Pass
discuss
immigration reform.
Justice
Here,
reform,
here.
criminal
Right.
justice reform. I think we're going to, Congress in a bipartisan fashion, for instance, is going to take a good look at sentencing and how we have, we have to justify to the world somehow that we have the highest per capita incarceration in the world, and whether that is what a merciful nation should do.
Certainly sentencing. More importantly, even now, because it affects so many, many more people, is this whole issue of comprehensive immigration reform. Comprehensive immigration reform is the moral imperative for our nation right now. It is what has been sitting in front of us, and we've done nothing about it. And from a family value standpoint, separating families, pulling mothers away from their children, we as a country cannot continue to do that. I think that's one of the biggest issues.
Yeah, and I don't want to let the moment pass to say that's absolutely true, but it also has another dimension which is critical. And if you look at the immigration that propelled the United States to greatness in the 18th and early 19th centuries, this is an economic engine that I think people need to realize. The country with the lowest average age of workers is going to win the game. And we need to be that country with more workers relative to retirees, with young workers, and with trained workers. And it's incumbent on us to not only bring the immigrants in that want to come and contribute to our society and harness the ones that are here, but to also train them up and educate them so they can be the next leaders of our country.